to timely advice from experts as we discuss all things leadership and technology. You'll get the inside scoop on better business practices, from making the most of your technology to leading a company with your head and heart. Pull up a seat with Marco CEO Jeff Gao and President Doug Albrechts. Let's Tech.
Welcome back to Let's Tech. Today we're very, very fortunate to have an outside guest, and we'll get to that in a minute. But Brittany, this is the first time I think we're doing this fully remote with me. And as you know, we've been talking a lot about, if you've been listening to the podcast, we've been talking a lot about security, and we know that COVID-19, especially during the COVID-19 period, we've seen quite a few incidents. I think an explosion of cybersecurity incidents, easy for me to say. They've certainly skyrocketed, and they've impacted everything from, you name it, supply chain to the cloud. And it's and I think a lot of the guests we've talked to about this that have been internal have been calling it one of the greatest challenges to our economy. And today we're very fortunate because we're going to be able to hear from a former FBI computer scientist who has worked on numerous national security and criminal intrusion investigations to learn how to protect yourself and your organization. We have a very special guest today, James Morrison from HP. James, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. So, listen, you've got a lot of experience in this, and we've had some people call this one of the greatest challenges to our economy. Do you think that's the case now, especially during COVID, and if you do, tell us why you think so.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've always said that this is the largest challenge to the U.S. economy, and really Western Europe has the same issue. And COVID just made it even worse. I call COVID the largest unplanned IT transformation that we've ever seen, because whatever plans companies had, in January of last year went out the window in order to just stay resilient and stay above boards. But what's happening now is that just now companies are starting to turn around and say, what do we do? Now security, let's put security back on the board and let's figure out how we can be more secure. But, in some cases, it's just been too late. I mean, we saw some really crazy attacks last year, and ransomware has become a data breach. We saw targeting of things like Avon. We saw targeting of Mattel Electronics, Garmin, groups that we never really thought of before. And then, of course, we cap off, what could cap off 2020 any better than SolarWinds? This massive nation state. And what I told some people last week, I said, just the nation states didn't want to be left out of the party. Everybody's making money, and they wanted to make a little on the side too. So it was a crazy year. And unfortunately, 21 isn't shaping up to be much different.
Well, I kind of glossed over this. I shouldn't have, James, but you've worked on numerous national security and criminal intrusion investigations for the FBI. We talked about that a little bit, and then you brought your skill sets to one of our longtime partners. Maybe tell us a little bit about that, what you did at HP.
Yeah, I spent 22 years in the FBI, worked the last 8 working national security, China, Iran, North Korea, stuff like that. I was a program manager for the FBI computer scientist program, so I managed a number of computer scientists across the South Central United States. And then, after 30 years of service, I had 8 years of military prior to that. I just figured it was a time for a different change, a different game. And I was talking to HPE. I'd done a presentation for their sales kickoff around cybersecurity, and they said, "Why don't you come join us as a technologist?" And so I joined them 14 months ago. And really, my story is to try to create the cybersecurity and security conversation across all their portfolio. And at that time, I was focused on the compute side. I had done some work with them around the Silicon Root of Trust and security, on the core server. But now it's much more than that. And I think every technology company has recognized this great need for security, and HP is no different. We have portions of our company like Aruba. We have Point Next services, and so many of us are recognizing that every product we produce has to have security built in, not bolted on, because security is not going to go away. This is the largest negative unemployment in any job field is cybersecurity, and every company is really focusing more on security. I think that was why they brought me on board.
Amen to that. And I will have to say, my partner in crime, who is now our in this podcast, who's our chairman. He was in the Air Force way back when, so we always thank him for his service. We thank you for the service as well. And amen to what you just said, because, we've had, I think Brittany will attest to this, we've had the majority of our podcasts on this topic alone. And that's because, people want to learn more about it. They want to hear about it. They don't just want to hear about it from Marco's standpoint, because they know they know we sell and we're in that as a practice, but we're just trying to enlighten them to what they should be doing for their business. And you've seen security breaches change in the midst of COVID, and I hate to keep coming back to that, but what are you experiencing that you have not seen before with someone with this type of background?
Well, I think it's we're just seeing this explosion of the criminal side. The criminal ransomware in particular has just taken off, and they've continued to get we always said that in cyber crime, they'll never let any crisis go unpunished. And so now you have this extended crisis where people are working from home, and the working from home environment has created a whole new attack vector. And our networks were built. I mean, I did old Windows NT and Novell networks back in the day, and we were building our networks in this north-south stack. So all of our traffic would go up through a firewall and a router, and we had one entry point, and we could somewhat control that. But now, because of this explosion also in the cloud and mobility, and the true edge of our networks is completely out of our control, it's harder. And a lot of the old security paradigms are being thrown out the window. And we really have to have a better conversation about what the new paradigm is going to be. And we've always heard the buzzword around things like zero trust. I think we really have to have real conversations around it now. Stop throwing it out there as some sort of, let me keep my board of directors happy with, buzzword they've learned at a security conference. But let's really look at what it looks like for your environment. And I will tell that to every customer I meet. I say, what are you trying to do? And then where do you want to go? Because it's all heterogeneous. It's all, heterogeneous, right? Every network is different. So if I don't know you and I don't learn what you're trying to do, then all I'm trying to do is pump a product. And it's not just about pumping a product. It's about pumping security. And security can be seen a lot of different ways by a lot of different companies based upon risks, based upon all those kind of things. So.
Yeah, and in those conversations, with this current state, I guess what would surprise most leaders, or when you talk to them, what is surprising most leaders? Because they're a lot of them understand the issue. A lot of them understand what's going on. They may not be familiar with it, and they may not know it in depth as you, but what's surprising them the most?
I think the supply chain conversation really surprised them. I think SolarWinds around that supply chain and the recognition that anybody you give access to your network could become a target, and therefore you're granting that access to, their customers. And I think we're having more conversations around that. So if I'm doing business with a company like SolarWinds, right now the question is, does SolarWinds have a responsibility to tell me who their suppliers are? In the past, the answer has been no. But now, because of their extended supply chain and the fact that they were infiltrated through that, we're seeing more of, I need to know who you're doing business with, and we're seeing a push down of security requirements. So if I'm a big company, I'm a Fortune 500 company, and I'm doing business with this other company, now I'm telling them, in order for you to do business with me, you have to do X, Y, and Z, and this is being paralleled even in the government sector with what they call CMMC, which is this new cyber maturation model, which is going to require every company that wants to become a defense contractor to have a certain level of measurable cybersecurity. And I believe that may become more prevalent across more sectors as that shows they have some value.
I think you're definitely right. The answer is definitely yes.
Yes.
I think, we hear that too, and I think you and I could have a real interesting conversation over a few beers about your FBI background. But
it's. I did 22 years. I did 4 years in crime scenes out in New Mexico, and saw some stuff that definitely is beer worthy. It was a crazy career, and I sort of just fell into it after my Air Force time. I needed a job, and they needed an IT guy, and I said I can do that. and I bet. you know.
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
Oh no, and then it morphed into. I mean, so I did IT for a while, and then I did network engineering, and then we started to see this rise of cybercrime. And so what the way the Bureau reacted was they said, we need technical investigators on all of our cyber squads. And so in 2012, we created this computer scientist program and said, and I was one of the first 20 that got, kind of moved over and retransitioned. And they're a crazy cadre of really smart people. I sat in a room with these 22 people, and I said, I think I'm the dumbest guy in this room. And it's amazing the talent that we were able to pull in and really help some on some great cases. It was fascinating.
So the FBI today is you'd say extremely proactive, in particular in cybersecurity. Do you think it takes the biggest chunk of the FBI's time at this point? I mean, are they taking that many steps to keep businesses safe, or has it migrated that much, or no?
It's weird. So the Bureau doesn't really have a cybersecurity mission. The cybersecurity, the proactive defensive mission, is really more for Homeland Security. And so Homeland Security is supposed to be the group that's out there working on those. And so we worked with them and trying to help companies develop better security, but it's just too big of a mission. Ours was more on the investigative side. So post criminal activity, we would go out and gather it. Or this is actually the larger mission that the Bureau is starting to take on, is going after the dark marketplaces. And I was lucky to have some great compatriots that worked on some of the takedowns that we did, because we just didn't have the bodies. Cybercrime is the third priority for the Bureau after counterintelligence and counterterrorism, right? Because 9/11, and so what's starting to also happen is that we're seeing this dovetailing, though, between counterintelligence and, in a way, counterterrorism and cyber. And cyber is becoming this a way for them to do terrorist activities. For example, the attack on the water system in Florida is a great example of how a criminal could use that access to try to poison a large populace. And that was always what kept us up at night, was what we call a 9/11 sort of cyber attack, or we have a nuclear power plant down here in Texas, and if somebody was able to do something through a cyber attack. And so that was where we were focused on really dismantling these cyber groups through the dark web or their financial sectors outside of the United States.
The water supply one is so fascinating, because I just read a Wall Street Journal article. I believe it was a Wall Street Journal, but they were just talking about one of the biggest security threats is to the U.S. water supply. Didn't think of that. And then the other thing you mentioned earlier was supply chain. And we don't always think about, especially businesses, they're not thinking of ways to necessarily protect their supply chain, and when it comes to security. So tell us why that's important for leaders today to be thinking about specifically supply chain.
Well, we went through this expansion of the World Wide Web, right? This supply chain all over the world, and we pushed manufacturing to places where it may have been cheaper or more. We had more of a workforce to use it. The problem with that is, especially when you get into this digital supply chain, is now we've seen some technologies that have come back that have been infiltrated on for what we'll call cyber nationalism. Every country has its own goal when it comes down to gaining intellectual property. And so we have to be very cautious about who we're allowing to have access to our raw product. We had cases where hard drives were shipped into Department of Defense networks that had a virus pre-installed on them. And when you start tracing back the technology, these hard drives then been produced in the Far East. And so where had this particular software, actually was in the firmware of the hard disk controller, where it had been implemented, that was a question. And so especially in the superpowers, we look at Russia, we look at Iran, we look at China and the United States. Cyber has shown itself to be in a place where nobody wants any rules, and I can do whatever I want to further my own political means. And we have to just start recognizing that. And there's a lot of smaller countries getting into the game, so to speak, because there's money there. There's an advantage to be gained. And China's done a great job of that. It's called the greatest theft in the history of mankind, of the theft of intellectual property through cyber attacks. And then you'll see they'll produce an airplane that looks exactly like an F-35, but it just doesn't have the internals. And so we just started to recognize those supply chains. Maybe what we need to do is say, maybe it's time to pull back. Maybe it's time to change that. And one of the things that we at HPE did was we actually are now producing an entire server line completely in the United States. We can produce, we have a plant in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin with cleared people and we can, have a made in the USA server. And I think you're going to see more of that as companies start recognizing that maybe we went too far in one direction and now we need to, kind of come back and protect our supplies.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Hey, now when I think of Chippewa Falls, I'll think of Leinenkugels and HPE, but that's a side note.
I was like going, oh, great, yeah.
Yeah, but you mentioned something, planning a virus on a hard drive to gather intellectual property. I mean, that's a scary thing and something that people don't, and I'm sure they're after more than just intellectual property.
Oh, yeah.
It's a gateway, right? And I think, and then that leads me to think, they're infiltrating the technologies that we currently have. What are some of the latest technologies being offered to help organizations secure their cloud and infrastructure today in light of some of the things you've just been talking about?
Well, I think that's why we're going towards this, the more of the idea of the hybrid cloud, right? So public cloud companies have done a lot, the Amazons, the Microsofts, they've done a lot to try to protect the data that they can within those environments. But a lot of companies have kind of stepped back from that and said, maybe I do need to have more of my own internal cloud as well. And so you're seeing that bring that kind of pushback. One thing we've been working on is we acquired a company called Cytail that does security by service. So in the old world, we secured servers because each server had a different service. But in the modern world, one server could run 50 services. So we're becoming more service and workflow workflow and data centric in the way we secure data. And so I think that's the conversation we've also seen, which is very fascinating, is data security has to be the focus. And network security is part of that. But if I start really focusing on where does my data exist and how do I protect that data in all of its states? So while it's sitting at rest, while it's in motion, and while it's in memory. And I think that's a very fascinating conversation that we've been kind of engaged with, and a lot of other, like Intel and AMD, we've got great relationships with both chip manufacturers, but their latest iterations of their processors have like secure encrypted memory. So the memory sitting on RAM is actually encrypted. It used to be, I'm an ethical hacker, and one of the things of ethical hacking was if I gain physical access to a server, I win, right? I can take that server and do whatever. But if the memory is encrypted, now it changes the game. And so I think it's part of that, back and forth on offense and defense.
Yeah, I think the most fascinating thing listening to you talk is all the work going on behind the scenes. What we don't realize, the amount of R&D and investment and things behind the scenes that are keeping, our clients that we communally have safe. From cybersecurity.
And that's part of my role as well, is to sit there and talk to these project managers and these when they're producing a new product, where is security? And I will say that I've been very happy to note that security is something that's happening at the beginning of the engineering process. I was an engineer for Lockheed Martin for in between my Air Force and my bureau time, and security was often something we talked about after the initial hardware was built. And that's not the time to do it anymore.
Yeah.
The time to do it in today's world is it has to be built in. It can't be bolted on. And everything we do, and this is like IoT, right? So IoT is a great, huge security hole that every industry has in the OT networks. And Congress passed this IoT guidance at the end of last year. We have to secure those because web cameras and these sensors and alarms and all of the stuff that's plugged into these networks are just little computers waiting for someone to do something bad with.
That's a great point. You're not checking the foundation of a house after the last nail went in, right? I mean, it's got to happen right through the process. But hey, that leads me to this, which is when you develop products, you're working with many other technology providers, and I think and what you can at least tell us, what are some game-changing moves that you see coming that it's going to help cybersecurity in the future?
Well, I think I kind of mentioned the one is the new processors coming out. AMD's already has their EPYC out. Intel's new one should come out soon. That's, I think, the core, right? So it starts at the base. Once the processor and the manufacturers start doing that, that starts it on that path. The second thing is really looking at security differently. Looking at security with the data as its core versus looking at security of, well, I've got my network secure. That's great. Firewalls are great. But now our data is pushing closer to the edge. So I think it says that by 2025, 75% of our data will be created outside of our data centers. It'll be created at the edge. And so security conversations have to start pushing towards that edge too. And there's a lot of very forward-looking companies that are saying, because my data is being created at the edge, I need to process it at the edge. So we're pushing processors out of the data center, pushing them back to the edge, and we're coming up with more better technologies like Pensando is a partnership we have, where we can put a network card inside of our server, and that network card will act like a full stateful firewall, a full encryption mechanism, a full telemetry offloader. And every one of your servers can effectively be a firewall. That's great technology that we're pushing.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, that's fantastic. Private clouds going to public, back to private because of security, and the way we're building products, we're bringing back manufacturing supply chains back.
Well, to the US. It's kind of the thing of the laugh of the client server, right? So you think about how IT has processed. I mean, I remember the old Burroughs terminals where you had a this WISE terminal that plugged into a mainframe, and the terminal itself was dumb. Well, now we're swinging back towards virtual desktops, which is kind of the same idea where my machine is only useful by plugging into a hosted software that's out there in the cloud. And so I think that's kind of the pendulum swing that we're seeing, because one of the questions I had with a lot of customers, I said, well, how did you secure your data when your data was at home on this computer that this person is using now to do their business? And they were like, well, we don't know. Well, that's not a good answer, right? That's not what we want to hear. So that's why those are the kind of conversations of, well, how do I secure my data? And so desktop infrastructure is part of it. Cloud-based application hosting is part of it. And that's where I think when we start really using the cloud, not necessarily from a cost savings, though there are some cost savings associated with things like our GreenLake offering, but if we start looking at it for a way to secure the data and make sure that the user experience is the same every time, now we've really seen a change in the way we're trying to employ that. And I think there's a lot of good conversation around that. And that's why we just want to talk to people and say, what are you trying to do? What's your goal? What's your vision? And then, working with, companies like Marco, we can say, once you know what you want to do, let us help you make that transformation and do it in a secure way.
That's great. And it's great information. And it's not often we get to speak to a former FBI computer scientist on our show, especially one with one of our great partners, HPE. So, James, I want to thank you for that. Is there anything you want to leave our listeners with, or any way that any place they can go to gather information on some of the topics we talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm, I do a lot of this, kind of speaking on the side as well. And I would tell you, first of all, have a plan. I mean, this is outside of any technology. I want to offer a few things. Number one, have a response plan. If you've put a plan together and you've tested your plan, it is amazing how much that will save you money. Second, have a backup plan and test your backup plan, right? I'm surprised the number of companies that have not done those two basic things. And then third, your people are your weakness. Take care of your people, train your people, test your people, and make sure that you're deploying security products that don't add additional work. If I'm putting more work on my IT staff, guess what they're going to do with security? Bing, they're going to throw it out the window because I got to take care of this person's computer over there, And so, I strongly can encourage every one of you to, work with us at HP, work through our partnerships that we have out there, but do those things at a minimum, and then technology becomes an afterthought once my people have been secured.
Well, that's great advice, James, and we really appreciate it. So thank you very much. And that's a wrap for Let's Tech. So hopefully you like what you heard today. If you did, feel free to let us know about it. We'd like to hear from you. And if you haven't had a chance to subscribe, please do so. And until next time we get this chance, let's tech. Have a great day.